Pero baka ito po ito. Buting follow. Sabi mo ano eh, nagsusuka. Kung bata. Sabi niya sa ako, pasok ka, pasok. Ulo, binta ka lang. Tapos ano, pinakabuo. Diretso ka natin. Maraming Sabi ko eh. Sabi ko, may konti naman, no? Ako yung siya sa karoon natin. Sabi ko ba, abot yun eh. Galing na ako yung parang lolo. Ayaw na kayo. Ayaw na kayo. Bawal ng babae.
Init.
Pakain natin. Pero kailangan nagbuhay tayo. Dahil di ba yan kaya? Ano ka dyan po eh? Dito kay ano? Kay Alan. Kay Alan. Kay Alan yung check yan. Alan lang. Magbawa ko lang dyan. Dapat sa sindahan. Oo, yan. Wait lang ang friend. Kapit na nga ba? Try sa pet ko. Lalo mo bilang. Grabe naman. Content yun yung mga ay, nakulit. Merkado ha? Ako. Ano tayo tayo? Ano tayo? Ano tayo? Dito na lang. No entry, post na only. Wala lang ha. Tama na. Ay, tama ka lang ako. Sila ba? Nagugas kayo ba? kung mapapansin niyo yung mali. Siguro. Nakikita ka na eh. Yan! Next! Done! Oh, yan! Hindi ka na.
Now, in Spain, the death toll from the coronavirus has increased dramatically and now stands at 803. The number of confirmed cases has also risen rapidly to over 17,000. More than 900 people are in intensive care. Spain has been under lockdown since Saturday, with residents required to stay in their homes for all but essential travel. Spain's neighbour Portugal has also declared a state of emergency to fight the pandemic. The new measures allow the government to restrict movement of people, ban protests and social or religious meetings, and temporarily suspend the rights of key workers to strike. Portugal has 785 confirmed cases of the coronavirus so far, with 3 reported deaths. But now to Italy. There, the number of deaths from the coronavirus has surpassed those in China. In Italy, 3,405 have now died from COVID-19, a rise of 427 in just 24 hours. The total number of cases has risen to above 41,000. Italy's outbreak came to light in the north of the country in February. We report now from Bergamo in Lombardy, in northern Italy, one of Europe's wealthiest regions. It finds itself at the epicenter of the country's outbreak. And a warning, my report contains some distressing images. Bergamo, once upon a time, just a month ago, still a byword for northern Italian charm. Today, in terms of untimely deaths, perhaps the most dangerous place on earth. At night, these army trucks ferry the dead to other towns where they can be cremated. And the people trying to stop this from happening are the volunteers battling to save lives and their own town. Bergamo alone has already had 4,000 cases with 400 deaths. They don't want 84-year-old Teresina to be the next. She needs oxygen, which is already in short supply. And her carer describes how things have got worse in the last 24 hours. Her carer is struggling.
La mia famiglia è giù in Bolivia, marito, figlia, sì. Io sono qua giorno notte con la signora. E mio marito mi aveva detto, prendi le tue cose e torna qua, mi ha detto.
But simply to move Teresina from one room to another and put her in her own bed is a Herculean task. With the hospitals full, she needs to stay at home. Then the requisite deep clean, as if your life depended on it, because it might. During a short break, Samantha says it's heartbreaking to take patients to hospital and then watch their families as doctors decide if they can help them or not.
C'è il parente dietro che magari ti dice fate qualcosa, portamelo via, sta morendo, mi sta morendo davanti agli occhi, portamelo via, perché non fate niente. C'è chi lo supera, c'è chi è 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 volte inizia un attimino a vacillare. Perché fondamentalmente noi siamo tutti volontari, non lo facciamo di professione, non siamo nati infermieri.
As many as 10 people are dying every day in a small city of 120,000. Health workers compare it to a war or earthquake zone.
E devi fare una scelta, un triage, quindi selezioni chi cammina, lo fai uscire, lo raggruppi tutto in un posto e sono i verdi. Chi sai che non ce la può fare, non ti metti a rianimarlo perché sai già che quello è spacciato, quindi quello è nero. Devi selezionare chi ha la possibilità di sopravvivere. Adesso negli ospedali stanno facendo così praticamente.
On their way to the next visit, written on someone's embroidered handkerchief, if we get through this, a big thank you. We will get through this. Funeral parlours are overrun. Churches have been banned from holding funerals, but have been helping to store the bodies before cremation. A month ago, the local newspaper had a single page for obituaries. Yesterday, there were 10 pages of names, but these are burials without mourners, behind closed cemetery gates. For the volunteers, more deep cleaning. The next case involves Claudio Travelli, in his late 50s, who should be going to hospital, but the health workers worry that he won't survive the wait until a bed and a ventilator are freed up. So the decision is to keep him at home, in his own bed. His wife and daughter look on, helpless. Exhausted, they have one final job tonight, before doing it all again tomorrow.
Questa persona aveva chiamato il 112 alle 20:23 e siamo stati attivati adesso che sono le 22:30 più o meno. E di solito un codice giallo come questo viene processato in massimo 10 minuti, invece qui i tempi d'attesa si sono dilatati come...
Their final case is 41-year-old Antonio Amato. His wife and sons watch anxiously from a distance as their father is carried down the stairs to the ambulance. At least he's been deemed young enough to get a bed in intensive care. But they cannot know when they'll see him next.
But it's not all bad news. China has today reported there have been no locally transmitted infections at all today, for the first time since the virus was detected 3 months ago. But across the world, other countries are desperately trying to contain the spread as best they can. And in America, President Trump has said he would slash red tape to allow existing drugs to be tested and used in the fight against COVID-19. Siobhan Kennedy reports now on the latest from China and from across the world.
Wuhan residents in partial lockdown cheer medical staff as they board buses to go home, back to their families after being deployed to the epicentre of the virus. Months after COVID-19 gripped the city, killing thousands in the province. Today, for the first time, Chinese state media says no new local cases of the disease were reported. Wuhan is still designated high risk, but residents now free to wander around their compounds to deliver food and take advantage of the rare fresh air with factories still closed, while the endless sanitizing continues. Across China, the government says there are 34 new cases detected in people arriving from abroad, raising fears of reinfection. This woman says the situation is going in a good direction. Not so, says President Trump,
As far as believing what they're putting out now, I hope it's true.
who used his daily press conference to once again point the finger at China.
People would have known about it. It could have been stopped in place. It could have been stopped right where it came from, China. It could have been stopped in its tracks. Unfortunately, they didn't decide to make it public.
The president said he would cut red tape to help develop vaccines and therapies as fast as possible, though nothing is imminent. And the number of confirmed cases in America at more than 10,000, with 160 dead, is soaring. In the virus hotspot of Washington state, Seattle Airport was like a ghost town. Its economy decimated as restaurants, bars and travel networks all shut down. And nationally, new figures today showed a sharp spike in unemployment claims as fears of a depression-like era loom. And in Australia, the Prime Minister followed President Trump's lead with drastic travel restrictions.
A travel ban will be placed on all non-residents, non-Australian citizens coming to Australia.
The country's national carrier, Qantas, is temporarily laying off about 20,000 employees, two-thirds of its workforce, as the virus takes hold. In Africa, countries like Kenya have so far experienced fewer cases, but they're disinfecting, closing schools and banning public gatherings. And people entering the country will be arrested if they fail to observe 14 days of self-isolation. The World Health Organization warning all African nations today to wake up to the threat and prepare for the worst.
Siobhan Kennedy reporting. Now, earlier I spoke to Ian Golden. He's Professor of Globalisation and Development at the University of Oxford, and I began by asking him, was a pandemic like the coronavirus an inevitable consequence of globalisation?
I'm afraid it was. We are hyper-connected, and the super spreaders of the goods of globalization, like major airport hubs, are unfortunately also the super spreaders of the bads, like pandemics, in the same way that major financial centers were the super spreaders of not only financial flows that led to investment, but also the financial crisis. And our cyber systems spread systemic risk through cyber viruses. So it was inevitable.
What does history, therefore, tell us in wishing to combat this thing?
History tells us that we have to act cooperatively. Pandemics are very different to other threats like climate change or antibiotic resistance or financial crises in that they really can originate anywhere in the world. The poorest countries, slums near airports, can spread viruses around the world in a very, very short period of time. And that means that we need to act cooperatively. We need a monitoring system that is global. We need a rapid response system that's global. We need to work on vaccines collectively.
Well, working collectively demands leadership. Where's that going to come from?
Well, we have two options. We have an option that looks like the aftermath of the First World War, where we had the League of Nations and then rising protectionism and nationalism, the collapse into the Great Depression and the Second World War. And then after the Second World War, we had much better leadership. We had the coming together with United Nations that worked for many years. After the 2008 financial crisis, we had a dramatic global response with President George W. Bush calling a big meeting, phoning the heads of state, China responding more aggressively than the rest of the world put together in terms of the financial package it put together. And this time, we have something very different, building on the frictions of trade and the other tensions of recent years. We have President Trump calling this a Chinese virus. There's no wall high enough that will keep out the threat of pandemic or other threats. We really need to understand that isolationism and protectionism are going to give us an even worse threat coming forward.
What sort of world do you believe will flow from this?
Well, I very much hope that we learn the horrible lesson that we're going to have to endure over the coming months, which is that we need to worry much more deeply about the divisions within our society. This is going to exacerbate inequality within our societies, and it's going to exacerbate inequality around the world. And we need to worry much more about how others are doing, how we work with them to overcome these threats. I believe that if we had empowered the WHO more effectively, if we had worked more effectively on this threat, we could have prevented it.
Well, finally, this is your subject. Do these events of the present day leave you more optimistic or pessimistic?
This is a terribly worrying moment. It's worrying not only because of what we're seeing all around us and the scale of the threat, which I think is much greater than the 2008 crisis, is more like a war, and because we're seeing a very weak response globally. I'm optimistic when we see the building of communities nationally, and we're seeing that in the UK and elsewhere, that some good can come out of it. But it really does require that our leaders step up, not only nationally, but globally, to a joint solution.
Kumarain na ako. Landas ka na lang muna, ha? Oh, landas ka. Landas ka, mas maganda nga, Tede, kung naka-plastic ka ng pag-yelo. Ay, basta dyan ako. Ay. Dito lang ka, video. Ayan ako. Interview ng council, right? Matindi sa operation dito. Ano na lang sa sundalo? Oo. Pare. Sabi ba tingin lang? Oo. Ano ba yun? Tuhul, sigot na ako. Saan na to? Picture ko dyan, ha? Kasi na dito. Ako na siya, sabi yung malapit. Wala ko. Anakot ko nga sa dalawa, paano ko bumaba. Nawala ko ulit ang box, ha? Ah. Ito na, may tama yung buhay. Okay lang. Ako ba talaga ka? Oo. Balik mo yun, balik mo. Balik mo. Wala ba sinaw? Wala, bumili ka lang. Walang pera. Nalulukot. Dahil wala datong. Ako sa office. Ikaw pa rin, ano? Ano ka? Okay, yung office na dyan. Hindi mo pagkawa. Okay nga, bata pa pala, ha? Oo. Nakadalawang balik, ha? Oo. Ay, wala ka ganyan. Taka parang ganyan. Tawag ka pa. Pumunta ka na. Bakit lang dyan na lagyan mapipiesta, oh.